Welcome to The Faithful Steward. This is a podcast all about sharing biblical wisdom and practical insights in order to help church leaders pursue and teach financial freedom as part of Christian discipleship. We believe this is a spiritual conversation, and this is a place where the church needs to lead the way in order to move our communities forward in how we steward God's resources. I'm your host, James Lenhoff, and I am so passionate about this conversation and helping leaders have the confidence to step into it. We believe that if we help people thrive financially and grow spiritually, it changes everything. And I am so excited to join you on this journey. This podcast is brought to you by Good Sense. If you'd like more information about what we're up to, you can go to our website at goodsensemovement.org. All right, let's get started with today's conversation. All right, today we're going to finish up our three-part series on teaching kids about money, and we're finishing that up as we transition them out of our homes. How do we prepare them? If we've done the blocking and tackling that we talked about in the last podcast, getting them to a place where they're used to it, they're familiar with it, they're not intimidated by money, now we're going to start hitting some of these milestone moments with them. And one of the most important roles for us as parents, as leaders of the family, is to give them guidance through those milestones that gets them set up with the disciplines that actually embed in them faithful stewardship for the long haul. We don't want to continue to keep them dependent on us, to continue to foster dependence around making decisions and navigating this stuff. You know, one of the things my mom always used to say, that her goal was to work herself out of a job. As parents, we do want to ultimately get to a place where our kids stand on their own. And when it comes to finances, this is a really important aspect of their life that they need to be able to navigate entirely on their own. If we continue to keep them connected to us, whether that's dependent because financially they need us, or dependent on us to make decisions because they're too afraid or too uncertain or too confused, it may feel good that they still need us, but it's not good for them. And so we need to set them up to navigate their future entirely on their own, able to make wise decisions without us intervening or injecting our opinions. And that really starts to become available to them at some of these milestone moments. One of those moments is actually, in my opinion, in high school. There's a point where they're getting their driver's license, they are using the car. That, in my mind, is a great time to get them established with a credit card. And I know the moment that I say that, people are going to lose their mind. How dare you give a high school kid a credit card? Well, what we need to do is give them access to and experience with having a bill, seeing what the balance is, understanding how credit cards work. Because the moment they get to college, or the moment they move out of your house, some of the milestones we're about to talk about, the first piece of mail they're going to get, or the first thing they're going to see on college campuses, are invitations to sign up for credit cards. And if they have no experience with them, they will sign up and wreck their credit. On the other hand, if you tell them credit is evil, credit cards are terrible, debt is awful, don't ever, 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 then they go through all of this process and they graduate from college, and now they have no credit history. And the first thing that happens when they go get an apartment on their own is someone's going to pull their credit report and find out they don't have any history, and they have a really hard time getting established. So we have to co-sign for them. We have to be their credit history because we never helped them establish it in the first place. And so we create an unintentional dependency by protecting them rather than giving them access to the experience of it. It's the same thing with all other aspects of money. We need them to have experience and be familiar with how all these things work so that when they're standing on their own, they're not intimidated, scared, confused, or overwhelmed by the thoughts of these different aspects of money. Credit is a big, big part of that now. You can't get a cell phone without someone pulling your credit report. So many things they're going to run into when they try to establish it on their own, if we have not helped them navigate getting a credit history established, then they will stay stuck and they'll need us to be their credit history for them and stay dependent in that way. So the way that works in my mind is we want kids to get a credit card and use it only to buy gas, pay it off every month, get some experience of how the statement looks, what it feels like to have a credit card, that they get used to not just swiping all the time for what they want, but they actually start to understand that the statement is going to come and it's going to tell you, hey, you have a $50 balance, you only owe $5. And they need to understand they need to pay the whole balance off every time. If they get some reps at that with some small dollars, they'll start to understand how this works. So many times I see college kids and young adults who have credit cards and they've been paying the minimum because they thought that's how it worked. You just paid the minimum. They never even knew that they needed to pay the whole balance. No one told them. No one gave them experience with it. And when the statement comes and says you owe $5, they send in $5, right? We need to give our kids a real understanding of how all these moving parts work and not be so afraid. Give them access, give them small limits, give them the ability to just try this thing and get used to it while they're still under our roof. Because the next milestone we're going to talk about is when they leave and go to college or they move out. When they go somewhere where they are making decisions on their own, we are no longer now in a position of being a cop. I had a good friend of mine talk about the transitions throughout parenting, that you start as a cop, then you move to a coach, and then eventually you land in the role of companion. And that is a beautiful progression. When they're little, you're the cop. Don't stop. Don't put that in your mouth. Don't eat that, right? And then you turn into the coach. Well, here's what I would do. Here's some advice. Here's some direction. I'm rooting for you, but you're kind of starting to get on to be on your own. That's the stage we should be in when they're transitioning out to go to college or to move out and start on their own. And in those milestones where they are starting to establish themselves, we don't want to be the cop anymore because we're reinforcing dependency. We want them to be seeking advice, asking questions. If this conversation around money has been something we've normalized in our family, then money conversations are easy. If they have a question or, hey, I've never seen this before, can you tell me what I should do about this? There's no threat or intimidation there because we've always been talking about that stuff. But if we've never talked about it, then they're going to assume that they should know. And they're ashamed that they would even have to ask the question. They're too afraid to bring it up because they feel like they're stupid around money because we've never talked about it. This is why those younger years are so formative, to make this normal and open and a dialogue that's ongoing, both directions. So when they leave to go to college, if that's the path they're choosing, one of the things we want to make sure we do is give them a really clear understanding of the costs of the college experience. What are we paying? How much of that are we financing? How much of that is mom and dad covering? How much are they responsible for? Those all need to be really clearly defined before they step into that stage. We need to give them a full understanding of what this next few years is going to cost them and what it's going to cost us. And so we want to build into this conversation around this time. They graduate from high school. They're moving into that next season. Are we able to afford this? Is this realistic? Is the path that you're on going to generate income that would allow you to pay these loans back over time? Is that a reasonable expectation? And we're going to talk a lot more in our next podcast about financing and college and how that all works and how we need to be thinking about some of those things. But for now, the most important thing in this milestone stage where we're helping prepare is, one, they should have a very clear understanding of how credit works before they walk into a sea of credit card applications, because that's what happens in college. And two, we need to help them navigate the financial aid system, the way that all of this works, so that they are really clear on what it's going to take to pay these loans off if they are taking on loans, how long that's going to take, what kind of income they need to generate. It's an incentive for them to get their degree done quickly to keep the costs relatively moderated and contained, and then have a very clear path forward of how they're actually going to pay off any financing that they take on. If we never have that conversation, then most of the time when they go to college, because financing is so ubiquitous, because student loans are everywhere and everybody gets all of that debt, they assume that it's just going to work out somehow. And so we need to prepare them so that they make wise choices as they enter into that stage, not while they're in the middle of it after they've already made a bunch of those decisions. That is a conversation that needs to be happening really when they're in high school and they're thinking about it. Are we talking about trade schools, associate degrees, bachelor degrees? Are you going to do graduate work? How is all that math going to work? Let's talk about that and really lay it out rather than being in a position where the decisions have already been made, whether they're affordable or not. That's where I find a lot of families get trapped because they want their kid to have everything. They want their kid to follow their dreams. And yes, I want that too. However, they need to be affordable. It needs to work. The math needs to make some sense. So let's say they get through that stage. They're done with college, or they decide they're not going to go to college. They're just going to move out, and they're stepping into adulthood, and they're moving out of your house. One of the things I see often is that families don't talk about when that's going to happen, how that's going to happen, what the expectations are. And again, if we have established that money is a thing that we talk about, that it's not something we're afraid of, this should be an easier conversation when that time comes. But we want to make sure that we have very clearly communicated when they are expected to go and establish their own home. What does that need to look like? When are we done as the support system of mom and dad? We need to make sure that that feels safe and confident, that our child feels like they're ready to take that step. But it may mean that there is some support that happens in a transition period. Maybe there's a period of rent that's subsidized by mom and dad. Maybe there's some small strings that stay attached in that transition, but those are clearly identified with very specific timelines before you step into that season. We don't want to be navigating that when there's a lot of fear and anger and emotion boiling. We want to navigate that and set those agreements up ahead of time when we're still for each other, we're still excited about the future, we're still looking forward to this stuff. If we wait with unspoken expectations, my dear friend Beth Guckenberger says that expectations are just premeditated resentment. And I love that thought. And there is no more powerful season where resentment gets unleashed than when kids think they can stay as long as they want. Parents were expecting the kid to move out. Kids think mom and dad will help with rent or buy a car for them or do whatever they need. And mom and dad are saying, we thought we were going to be done with these costs. And neither of those parties are talking to each other, right? That's when we see really hard emotion and relational fracture that happens because we haven't been talking all along and we didn't communicate, we just jumped. And now we're stuck trying to untangle ourselves from dependency without having communicated the expectation that there would be independence. One of the most valuable things we can do to help our child in that transition is get them going on their own spending plan. Help them map out as coach what it will take for their life to work. So if they are thinking they're going to rent an apartment, here's what that cost looks like. Here's what rental insurance looks like. Here's what the utilities are going to be. Start mapping for them a spending plan that gives them the confidence that the income that they're making will make this all work. Because it's possible that they're just looking at costs that they've never paid before and assuming their income will be enough to cover it. That they've never had to pay rent before. They've just lived in your house. And so they just assume their lifestyle will be similar, that they'll still be able to eat out as often as they did. They'll still be able to enjoy and play and have all the fun that they want to have, because when they weren't paying for all these things because you were, their assumption is that life doesn't cost anything close to what it actually costs. They've been living a subsidized life their entire experience. And so we need to help them map out a very clear, very realistic expectation of a spending plan so that they can have the confidence that as long as they stay in this plan, the math works. And that is really hard to do in theoretical. You can share your spending plan with them when they're younger, and I highly recommend that you do. You can let them in on what your family's household costs, but it's not until they have real hard and fast numbers. They know this apartment costs this much. The utilities cost that much. You can talk in theory, but for whatever reason, it just doesn't land. It's not until they have real bills that you can do this work and do it very effectively. If you help navigate for them how this can all work well, they then step into that with confidence rather than fear. It's a great role to play in that season. And it's one that can be exciting for both of you, that this is possible, this is doable. And we want to make sure that in that spending plan, we're building in the things that they enjoy, that they are actually enjoying time with their friends and hobbies and the stuff that they want to do, because they are going to do that anyway. And so if the spending plan doesn't work, unless they never spend money on any fun, then the spending plan doesn't work. And so we need to make sure we're intentional about mapping all of those things out and helping them step in to tracking, organizing, understanding their resources are going in these directions. This is one of the key pieces of faithful stewardship, is that they know where the money went and why. Where did God's resources go, and why did you decide to spend it that way? As long as they can start with some of those foundational practices, those disciplines, then continuing it is so much easier. And so that's one of the most crucial foundational things that we can help them establish as they launch on their own. And lastly, the milestone of getting married. This is a really complicated thing to navigate. There's a whole nother family, a whole nother understanding of money coming into play. There's this beautiful, exciting honeymoon stage where everything is lovely and beautiful and easy. And then it's going to start to get hard. And one of the things that's really helpful, if you've established some of this conversation around money, by sharing your mistakes along the way, talking about when you were first married, some of the decisions that you made, you humanize, normalize yourself. You make yourself more relatable, not just to your child, but to their future spouse as well. And so we can put ourselves in a position where we're counseling, we're being more of a companion, we're telling stories, we're sharing about our early marriage and giving them some direction, while also giving them some insight into what we did wrong and how we made mistakes, rather than acting as if we've always had this figured out. If there is any expectation from either family to support the new couple, that needs to be clearly communicated across the board, in my opinion. Because we don't want one family to be subsidizing while another family is trying to cut strings and create independence. And we end up with this situation where the relationships get really wonky because the one couple that's trying to get their child up and on their own is in some ways feeling like they're being sabotaged because the other side of this new couple is subsidizing and supporting. And so just have an open conversation of what's expected, what's happening, where is money flowing, if it is flowing at all. Maybe even sit down with the new couple and have a conversation around how our family of origin impacts the way we think about money. Open that dialogue. Get them talking about it. Make sure they recognize how incredibly important it is to know that they will need to establish how they do money. It's not the way you did it, and it's not the way the other spouse's family did it. It's the way they're going to do it. And so if you've been really open and have had lots of conversations about money, but your child's new spouse is coming from a family that thought money was taboo and never talked about it, this can be a bit of a challenge to get that conversation to start and to open up. But what we don't want to do is just say, this is the way money should be handled, this is what you should do, and have both sets of in-laws giving that directive kind of leadership. We really want to coach, but also give freedom for them to navigate some of this stuff on their own and decide together as a couple what they are choosing, rather than making those choices for them and keeping them dependent on our leadership. Even though it feels like we want them to stay connected to us, we really do want them to walk into adulthood with confidence and clarity and have their marriage founded on faithful stewardship that they're choosing together rather than being demanded or assigned. They are choosing this life of faithful stewardship because they see the beauty of it. Ideally, they've seen it modeled in you. They've seen it walked out in your family's life, and they are excited to replicate some of those things in their own way, in their own version. That is ultimately what we're trying to set them up for in their marriage. These milestones are tricky to navigate in lots of different ways, but they are excellent opportunities to have really fruitful conversations that lead to more discipline, more faithful stewardship, and a higher level of honoring God with God's resources. Well, thank you so much for listening to the Faithful Steward podcast. Be sure to check out the show notes for links and other information that we mentioned in today's episode. Also, be sure to check out our website at goodsensemovement.org to get all the resources we offer churches to help equip them in teaching financial stewardship to their community. If you have any questions or any topics you want to make sure we cover on our show, you can email me at jameslenhoff@goodsensemovement.org. I'd love to hear from you. I hope you all have a great week. We'll talk to you next week.